Please welcome Airbus North America Chairman and CEO Robin Hayes and McKinsey & Company Senior Partner Vik Krishnan in conversation with Skift Airlines Editor Gordon Smith.
Very end.
All the way to the end. Vik, Robin and Vik, bit of a double act. Welcome to the Skift Aviation Forum. The mere mention of the word sustainability, particularly in the pre-lunch slot, it can have eyes glazing over. Let's try and
Not here.
Oh, you haven't seen the buffet, it looks pretty good. We're trying to keep things pragmatic because there's a lot of goodwill. People know they want to engage with sustainability, but it can feel abstract. So let's kick things off in very real terms. In your own words, Vik, how big is this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at global or aviation and its contribution to global emissions, it's about 2.5% of carbon emissions globally. Currently. The reality is that if you look at the conversation, or the share of conversation of the external voice, if you will, it occupies more like 10% of the discussion, right? So there's a sort of an asymmetric attention on aviation, and one would argue rightfully so, right? Because you see there's a line of sight to decarbonization of vehicles. We have electric vehicles in our lives already, and a number of other larger sort of polluters, if you will. People are already seeing tangible change, whereas in aviation, it feels like a little bit more abstract and a little further away. And so, rightfully, we should be having the conversation about how to change. And in reality, the technologies necessary are going to take a while to evolve. And so I think it's right for us to be having that discussion in this room and now.
Lovely intro. And Robin, in your own words, how big is the challenge that we've got ahead of us?
Look, it's a big challenge, but I also think it's a big opportunity. And it's funny because it really started pre-COVID. A lot of conversations around sustainability, so CORSIA had sort of taken hold. And then it kind of got put to the side with COVID because obviously that became the biggest threat the industry had. But now we're back, and I think this is the number one topic that most of us are dealing with. And it's easy to look at it and sort of just get, the challenge is too big.
Yep.
But I think we have to take inspiration from other industries. I mean, I don't know if you saw that that SpaceX rocket come back to Earth and literally get caught by those chopsticks. I mean. There are some amazing solutions out there. I think the thing about sustainability, though, in our industry, it's not a silver bullet. Like, there's a number of things that we've got to be doing. We've got to be doing them together. We've got to be doing them quicker in order to make the progress that we need to make.
Vik, you and your team, you've coined it as the 3 horizons of sustainability. Tell us what that means in practice.
Yeah, so in the context of aviation, Gordon, really the 3 horizons are a question of what technology is available and when, and at what price point, right? So in the first horizon, we see operational improvements. So think of that as being better maintenance and engineering, more frequent engine washes, better flight paths in terms of how you navigate through ATC and in the sky. And then that sort of the focus is really on operational efficiency. The second horizon is about the adoption of SAF and other alternative fuels. Right now, both production volumes as well as costs make it prohibitive to scale that or adopt that at any meaningful scale without significantly increasing the price of flying, right? And so that's going to take some time to evolve. And government actions are also going to be necessary to help propel that forward. And then the third horizon is all about novel propulsion. So you're starting to see that at the very, very, very short end of the payload range and range end of the spectrum, where with advanced air mobility and other such opportunities arising as a result of electrification, hydrogen, more long-term potential. But all of that's going to take a while. And realistically speaking, we are up against physics and chemistry and battery density and the ability of batteries to be able to, or at least current battery technologies, to be able to sustain aviation in a truly 100% decarbonized way. And so, honestly speaking, if you look at the timeline of the adoption of these various alternative technologies, it's going to take a while, just realistically, right? And some of it is because in my lifetime, I don't necessarily expect to be on a fully electric airplane that can carry the payload that a 777-300ER or an A350-1000 can from LA to Sydney, right? It's just too long away.
What about regional jet?
Whereas a regional jet that is obviously going to come sooner technologically. The question just becomes how much of the decarbonization footprint that addresses, right? Because, and you start getting into questions about, is it just carbon emissions? Is it NOx, foot and contrails? I mean, there's a bunch of other elements that start becoming relevant as well. But yes, we will see the adoption of novel propulsion sooner in shorter haul, lower payload environments.
A lot of very interesting themes. We'll unpack them in a bit more detail in a moment. But Robin, new planes are great, new engines are great. You can't argue with the numbers, 20% on average, cleaner than the aircraft that they replace. But the issue is getting these aircraft, getting these engines. We've got older aircraft flying for longer, more polluting aircraft. Do you see any end in sight for the current capacity crunch? Not just at Airbus, but more broadly.
Yes, look, I mean, I think that the thing about sustainability, we have to take a very long-term view, and it's certainly beyond some of the supply chain challenges that we've had. And look, I still think that's going to take a few more years before we sort of get to the other side of that. But it is a big opportunity. I mean, 70% of the global aviation fleet is still flying around on sort of previous generation technology. We at Airbus are already studying the technology bricks in terms of more efficient wing, new engine technology, lighter, more composite material that will potentially enable the next generation of airplane, which will be another step forward. We need to have more of a conversation about air traffic control. I'm really sick of this topic. We've been talking about it in Europe, we've been talking about the US, we've made very little progress, and yet it's another 7 to 8% we spend just flying, in carbon emissions, just flying things around.
We heard Robert Isom say Chicago to New York is longer today than it was 20 years ago.
It's really frustrating, and the problem is the whole debate in the US since we've come out of COVID has been on a control of staffing. And we had that before COVID, and it was accentuated by COVID. And the sort of conversation around the sort of the next gen and the technology, it's kind of been pushed off the front page. But it's and because government has a big piece of this. One, in creating the right incentive structure for new energy, new energy technologies. We've seen that in solar, we've seen that electric. Actually, what went in the Inflation Reduction Act for the SAF blenders tax credit was a really, really good start. But also, where governments are responsible for air traffic control, they have to fix it. I think so. There are a number of opportunities that I think we have that should make us sort of feel we can absolutely have an impact here.
Yeah, and Robin's absolutely right. I mean, there's no one in this room who wants to burn more fuel, right? And the reality is that even before COVID, even before SAF was an everyday sort of acronym that people understood, we have been on a continuous glide path to reducing fuel burn and making aircraft and engines more efficient. I mean, there was a 40% increase in fuel efficiency between 2005 and 2019, right? And so we're continuing on that journey. And the adoption of SAF and everything else is going to evolve as technology does. But airplanes and engines are getting more efficient, and fleet replacement cycles drive improvement in efficiency.
And Vik, is that considering things like increased load factors?
Yeah,
as well.
So absolutely. So it's like it's on a per RPK, RPM basis, right? We've been seeing significant gains even pre-COVID, just because engines have gotten more efficient. And this is really, sorry, Robin, is really a propulsion story in many ways, even more so than airframe, right? In part because the geared turbofan and the LEAP engine, notwithstanding near-term issues, are significantly more efficient than their predecessors.
I want to bring back just something that you mentioned there, Robin, about air traffic control. Very, very easy to point the finger at Europe and the US. You're a worldly man. Is there anywhere in the world that's getting ATC right? Because it feels like no one is able to do it.
Well, look, I'm sure there, I'm sure there is. I don't know it well enough really to comment, but if we look at the big markets like Europe, if we look at the US, if we look at the sort of growing Asian market, I mean, we have to get this right. And look, we are making progress. I mean, if you look at by the end of 23, I think it was, where airline passenger traffic had returned to pre-COVID levels. Jet fuel demand was down 7%. So now, is it enough? No. Have we got to do a lot more? Absolutely. But we are starting on this this journey, and there's been a lot of innovation in SAF. There's been a lot of new entrants to the space. It's just not manifested yet in sort of sufficient volumes for people to sort of go, wow, we can see the difference.
A quick reminder for the audience, I'm sure you're very familiar with the app by now. Any questions for Vik or Robin, get them in. Let's bring it right back to the airframes, Robin. Lots of chatter in the industry with the new US administration coming in about potential of increased tariffs. Is that something that you see as a possible headwind to you and your business? You're heading up North America for a European airframer. How does that all compute?
Yeah, look, I think we have to wait and see what the proposal is. It was clear on the, on the election circuit. It was a major piece of the economic campaign. I think for all of our industry, not just Airbus, the aerospace industry is global in its nature. Parts and components and sub-assembly are moving across borders all the time. And so if you're going to go and sort of tariff that, and then you get the sort of the retaliation of the tariff, you're going to add a lot of cost, which is going to be ultimately be borne by, end users and customers. And so I think if the goal is to build a US manufacturing, then I would point to the Airbus facility in Mobile, Alabama. It wasn't even there 10 years ago. It was being built. When we open the third line next year, it will become the fourth largest final assembly facility in the world, behind Seattle, Hamburg, and Toulouse. So I think that's what and so to sort of tariff assemblies and sub-assemblies going into Mobile to build airplanes in Mobile, to me, that doesn't feel like the policy is meeting what we're trying to do.
Agreed. So, and frankly, sorry.
No, sorry. I need to get some water. So you carry on.
No, so the airplanes that Robin's Airbus and Boeing manufacture would be gliders without U.S.-made engines, right? And so the reality is we are in a federated ecosystem when it comes to aerospace, and we can spend a lot of time legislating how much content on an A320neo or 321neo versus a 737 MAX is U.S. originating. It gets very difficult very quickly because of the global nature of the supply chain.
Yeah, you look at the brand, it's a US brand, but the supply chain. Robin, by Airbus's own forecast, your global fleet forecast is due to double in 20 years. Net zero 2050 is only 25 years away. How on earth do those two statements relate to one another? One's got to give.
No, I think that's a great point. I think that the opportunity. I think that we all hear so many people talk about how AI is going to change the world, and all these people are going to lose sort of things that are careers today are all going to be done by AI. But we don't spend enough time looking at what are the opportunities that these things create. And aviation, in my opinion, is the most underrated, least talked about, kick-ass opportunity there is out there. The need for people is vast. The need for people who haven't necessarily been to college is vast. Whether it's pilots, whether it's mechanics, whether it's flight attendants, whether it's folks working in management, whether it's people in the manufacturing, whether quality, the need is vast. So that's the opportunity. Now back to the question around, and by the way, huge workforce development opportunities. There are so many vacancies today in high quality US manufacturing jobs. And so we've got to kind of clearly address a big workforce challenge. And my speech on the supply chain is, yes, it may take a few more years for things to stabilize, but if we don't address the workforce skills issue, that will then be the next sort of constraint after that. So back to SAF. Look, the risk, we just have to be incredibly aggressive and incredibly ambitious, and as a stakeholder community, do everything we can to demonstrate to governments and everyone else we're working on this. And governments need to be part of the solution too, because at the end of the day, just kind of making air travel more expensive, making it more sort of something that only rich people can benefit from, as we've seen from the recent election in the US, is not going to be the answer to that problem.
Can you sit here in 2024 and say, honestly, you think you can double the fleet and still attain net zero by 2050? Not just at Airbus, but industry-wide. Do you honestly believe that?
Well, I think if we don't all believe we can, it's never going to happen. Is there a risk we don't get there? Of course there is. Is there a risk the fleet doesn't double? Yes, of course there is. But this is the greatest challenge of our time. We have an amazing industry full of a lot of people who are committed to this. And when we look at the new airframes, new propulsion technologies, when we look at more things we can do on SAF, when we look at new energy bricks, when we look at down the line things like power to liquid and synthetic fuels, when we look at the ability to increase SAF from 50% to 100%, all of these things together, I think will get us there. But look, it's a huge challenge. But what choice do we have? Or to sit back and say it's all too difficult. We're not gonna do it. Of course not.
Massively so. I mean, if you look at with the fleet doubling, our estimation is that actually emissions, even if you didn't do very much, emissions will only increase 44%.
Only?
Right? No, but relative to a 100% increase, right? Because you've got a couple of different factors that are at play here. The first is what types of aircraft are those new airframes and engines replacing? And they're typically replacing aircraft that just are less efficient in terms of fuel burn. The second element is upgauging. So we've seen a steady increase in the average seats per departure over time, which is more efficient from a fuel perspective on a per capita basis. And so, a lot of these 321neos that Robin's selling are replacing older vintage, smaller gauge airplanes that essentially are just less fuel efficient in the mission they fly.
You know as well as I do, Vik, that it's not always like-for-like replacements. This is fleet growth as well, so we're going to see net increases, even with cleaner engines.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the case. But I mean, then you start getting really into socio-political issues around the democratization of air travel. I mean, what Robin referred to earlier around, are you going to make this the province of only rich people? I mean, you have a number of countries around the world that are moving into the next generation of essentially not traveling by bus, not traveling by train, or not traveling at all. And now starting to fly again. I mean, I was born in India, and I remember my first international trip that I ever took was to come to the United States at 17 to go to college, and now I see my cousins and their kids, going on vacation to Singapore, right? And I'm not sure I feel comfortable, or we as an industry should be telling them that they don't have the right to do that just because we've decided that emerging markets shouldn't be flying at the same sort of efficiency or per capita base as we do in Western economies.
Really interesting. I think that is a common complaint that the discussion can be too Eurocentric, too US-centric. We need to be thinking much more internationally about this. Let's bring it right back to solutions, if we can, because I think there's a lot of people that expect a degree of patchwork regulation and legislation. Europe might be a little more progressive than some other parts of the world, depending on your point of view. Robin, do you think we could see an aviation trade war where you've got different parts of the world making different decisions at different times and being out of kilter?
Look, I think it's clearly a risk, and we've seen little snippets of that in the past when the EU tried to roll out the emissions trading scheme. My good friend Willie Walsh is here from IATA. A very good question to ask Willie later. Look, I think we have some history here.
Yep.
We have some history in trying to solve this as a global community. We had CORSIA, we had IATA's net carbon zero, which Willie led commitment back in 2050. And I think that we need to try to keep a level playing field, but we also have to accept we have to make progress, and we have to accept that there are little fights that might pop up from time to time that need to be dealt with. But I think this keeping a level playing field is going to be incredibly important as best we can.
Anything to add, Vik?
No, I totally agree with Robin in the sense that you are going to see different regulatory environments around the world. We're already starting to see that. Europe has been more forward-leaning in terms of its approach to regulating not just aviation, but other forms of carbon emission than some other parts of the world. But that's no different, frankly, than anything else that we've seen before with regards to the adoption curve for new technology, the affordability of new technology. So, that's going to continue, and I think airlines that are, for the most part, global businesses are very capable of adapting to what some people might describe as a patchwork of regulation.
Robin, your experience is grounded in airlines rather than grounded airlines.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
British Airways, more recently JetBlue, of course.
Yeah.
Does that influence your perspective, coming now from an OEM perspective, looking at these challenges and solutions?
Well, I think, the interesting thing about sustainability, and we've said this from the beginning, like no one part of our industry can solve it, right? The airlines can't solve it enough themselves. The manufacturers can't solve it themselves. We all have to work together. So, I think what I've been very pleasantly surprised about joining Airbus. I kind of believe this to be the case, but sometimes when you go inside an organization, it's not all what you seem. But I've been very, really inspired by Airbus's genuine commitment to sustainability and doing what it takes over time to create a more sustainable industry. And I think a lot of that is the European heritage of the company, but it's the same here. I mean, when we're in the US and when we're down in our whether it's our aircraft manufacturing facility in Mobile, whether it's our helicopter manufacturing facility in Mississippi. We're talking there about energy conservation, water use, SAF use in test flights. So it is a global commitment, and it's very heartfelt.
I mean, Sean Donahue was on stage earlier.
Yep.
DFW Airport has some pretty ambitious net zero aspirations and is delivering on it, right? And they have natural gas fields on the airport. I mean, that's a cleaner form of energy than conventional fuels. And so the industry takes, as Robin said, across the value chain, takes it quite seriously.
We currently have the Airbus A320neo, A321neo. There's probably hardly anyone in this room that hasn't been on a neo of some description. Tell us, Robin, is the next incremental step from Airbus's commercial aircraft program the neo and then the Zero E? It seems like an enormous jump. What's in between?
No, I mean, I think, there's the 3 Zero E concept airplanes. No, I think that there is certainly the possibility, and something that we're studying now, sort of the next generation, what I call sort of conventional aircraft, but again, deploying radically different propulsion technology, significant improvements to the aerodynamic nature of the airplane, lighter, and a number of other things that I probably shouldn't talk about.
Please do.
But no, I mean, I think we definitely see that as a sort of a next step in the journey to, again, improving the capabilities. I mean, I think if we look at the what the 330 and then the 350 has done in terms of opening up markets, if we look at the rollout of the XLR, which is an incredibly popular airplane, these are bringing new missions. They're allowing airlines to serve markets profitably in a way that wasn't possible before. And then on top of that, you sort of and again, the sustainability thing is great as well, because it's going to drastically reduce the airlines' operating costs. So yeah, I don't know. None of us at Airbus are sitting here waiting for a hydrogen airplane. We're spending a lot of money on that too. But there's other steps that will take place.
But you acknowledge those concept images. They do seem fairly fanciful sitting here in 2024 as the next stage for Airbus's portfolio. There's going to be something in between.
That is something that we're spending a lot of time working on and thinking about. But I think there is very likely to be something in between.
Exciting stuff. Keen to take some questions, so if we can get the questions brought up on the screen. I know there was one about loyalty programs. I don't know, Vik, if you've got any thoughts on this. How compatible airline loyalty programs are with promoting responsible flying?
Yeah, I mean, look, airline loyalty programs have evolved significantly over time, and our friend from Air France KLM will be more adept at commenting on the specifics. But the reality is that they have engendered an adoption of credit cards and sort of an infusion, if you will, of loyalty influence behavior into consumers' everyday lives. The redemption is, in some instances, for travel, but I think every loyalty program leader that I've spoken to will also tell you that they're working really hard to create opportunities to redeem those points for other aspects of what people do with their lives as well, right? Whether it's hotel stays or car rentals or Netflix subscriptions or whatever the case might be. And so I think, I think it's just sort of reducing loyalty to a single point, sustainability-focused narrative, I think is a bit too reductive.
I'm going to be a bit naughty here. I'm going to ask you this question, but I'm going to ask you, Robin, as well. Is COMAC or Embraer a more viable, large commercial operator over the next few decades? Discuss.
Vik, after you.
Well, look, I mean, they both have a space in terms of the mission they play, right? I mean, the reality is that COMAC.
You're putting COMAC and Embraer on this?
I mean, look, China was a third of the world's backlog before COVID, right? So the reality is that anything that Chinese airlines do is relevant to global aviation in a meaningful way, and so COMAC is going to be relevant. Embraer is I think Robert referred this to us earlier. They're the largest American Airlines, the largest customer of the Embraer 175, 170 program in the world, if not the largest, one of the largest. The reality is that Embraer is going to have a place, already has a place in U.S. aviation. So I'm not calling this. It's like that would have been. It'd be too hard a call at this point.
You just need to sort out the pesky scope clauses for Embraer to
minor
really
details. on the E2, yes, but less so on the 175 and 190.
For the purposes of openness and transparency, Robin, anything to add? Who's the bigger threat?
No, I mean, look, I think the way that we think about this at Airbus is that, we're focused on building what we think are the best products and the best solutions to what our customers need. And if we do that, we can continue to be successful, recognizing that, the competitive market may come and go, and clearly COMAC is here, but as we talked about earlier, the demand for aircraft is so huge in terms of doubling, plus all the replacement that comes with that we need to focus on just building the best products.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Some really, really good ones here. We're not going to get to them all. Just one final one to end. Isn't regulation the better immediate solution to reduce emissions, setting capacity to be aligned with demand? Any final thoughts on that? Yeah. Regulation stopping people from flying or making it less attractive?
Well, I mean, as a manufacturer of aircraft, I think that's a terrible idea. But look, I don't think anyone wants to go back to 1978. And the thing is, you have an industry here that really wants to get this done. No one's pushing back on it. We have a number of technical hurdles we have to overcome. It needs significant capital to get there. But there's a really good consensus across that we need to do that. And again, regulation, if that means reducing capacity, if that means increasing taxes, if that means flying more expensive, I mean, people are going to have a view about that. I mean, look, we just had an election here in the US where inflation was probably the number one topic that, led to the change in administration that we got. So you start cranking up airfares 20% and other things, you're going to bring that inflationary risk right back. I really don't believe that's an answer that's going to have at least here in the US. Other parts of the world, maybe in Europe, there's more tolerance of that, but still, I think most people are going to have a real issue if that is how the thing unfolds.
Appreciate your honesty there. Vik, thank you. Robin, thank you. I can hear some rumbling tummies there, so it is lunchtime. So thank you again both, and really appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll head off this way.